Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Find a Moment podcast, where we navigate the space between ideals and everyday life. We are your hosts, Gretchen Roberts and Jennifer Ford, and we look forward to finding a moment with you today.
Welcome back to Find a Moment. We are here for the kickoff of a new series on parenting, and we are launching into this just feeling very humbled to have the opportunity to discuss it. Also, very aware of our shortcomings and very thankful that you would choose to listen. Just to catch up on where we are kind of in life and in the life of our podcast, we just finished our last episode that was published was a standalone on Easter, the liturgical season of Easter, which is 50 days starting on Easter Sunday. And before that, we did a series called Meet the Artists, which was just, I think, probably one of my most favorite series that we've done, where we interviewed artists of all different backgrounds and disciplines and ages, and that we did the most interviews in that series that we've done so far. So that was fantastic and beautiful as well. But today we are going to have our introduction conversation to our parenting series, and I'm not sure how many episodes we will have for this. Gretchen, have we even decided?
Nope, we haven't.
I don't think so. We could probably go on for a really long time.
Right.
But we are just starting the conversation today. Another thing with this series, everybody has experience with parenting because we've all been parented and many of us are parents. And so I really hope that you as listeners will engage with us and send us feedback, whether through social media or emailing or texting if you know us personally, or just grabbing us in the hall at church or wherever you happen to run into us. We would love to hear feedback and things that you want us to discuss. And again, we're not going to discuss it from a position of authority or expertise. We would love to discuss it from a place of humility and just acknowledging value in conversation. So just putting all of that out there, Gretchen, I'd love if you would kind of open up and just share your heart for the series, for the discussion, and just let our listeners know where your heart is and what your vision for this conversation is.
Yes, so this is something that I think, Jennifer, we have spent a lot of time over the years talking about in all the various stages. And, we wanted this podcast to kind of be a reflection of our time talking over coffee. And so I feel like this series will really reflect that because we have been through a lot of seasons of parenting together and have really talked through so much. We wanted this to be a reflection of our conversation and a space where we can navigate the space between ideals and everyday life. And I think parenting is yet another place where we have a whole host of ideals and then it's met with everyday life. And I think the tendency is to feel like we're failing or we don't have it all together or everyone else has it figured out and all together. And so there can just be so many feelings of defeat and judgment and criticism and self-doubt that you can really, I feel like as a parent, you can kind of hide behind all of those feelings because it's just, you just feel that pressure from the outside and from the inside too. So I think being the two of us coming together through this podcast and just being vulnerable and humble and honest, I really hope that that opens up the conversation for parents to know that you're not alone and you're not supposed to do this alone. And in one of our upcoming episodes, we're going to talk about a lot of the myths and misconceptions and mistakes of parenting that we have had over the years. And I think that feeling of we have to figure it out on our own is probably one of the big myths I think that we feel or that we experience. So we're hoping that this series will open up the conversation for one. And number two, I hope that it will open up the dialogue not only in the parenting community, but in the Christian parenting community, because I feel like there is a host of issues, and hopefully we will talk on a lot of those throughout this series. I think that there are a lot of unique pressures and unique history in the Christian parenting realm. So I hope that we definitely are able to expose a lot of those things as well. And then another hope, we have a lot of hopes for this series, but another one is that we are able to connect with moms and parents of various generations. So we plan to have different guests on during this series, parents of baby toddler age all the way up to hopefully parents of adult children, and just to hear their stories and to glean from them, and also just to support and encourage one another and see kind of what the current issues are in those different generations of parenting. In one respect, I feel like I'm still a novice 20 something parent, and then I realized, no, I'm in my 50s, and I could have grandchildren, like but it just goes by so quickly, and there's so much of it that kind of feels like a whirlwind. But so yeah, we definitely want this to be an intergenerational discussion. So, a lot of hopes for this series and things that we will be able to discuss and hopefully open up conversations so our listeners can have those conversations with their own friends and family and spouses, and just to kind of get the conversation going and the support and encouragement.
This is just all reminding me so much of how our friendship even began because you invited me. Well, I was invited to your Mom Heart group through a mutual friend, through Danielle. And just hearing you discuss motherhood and parenting. The first book that we ever did was Heartfelt Discipline, which I'm
Mm,
actually, and that was 12 years ago. And I'm
wow.
actually reading through that book right now with a mom of an almost 2-year-old. So just to see that and rereading it now, first of all, the first time I read it, our girls were 3 and 5. And
Wow.
now that I'm reading it, our girls are, I see, will be 15 next week. And then Amelia is 17. So reading it through the eyes of the parent of teens, oh man, I feel like it should be on on the nightstand just through every year of parenting.
Right.
But it just hearing you talk about this, Gretchen, just reminds me so much of why you're really in a unique position to have this conversation because this is so foundational to just to who you are as a whole
Mhm.
person. You have such a passion for motherhood and for equipping families and parents and through the difficult things and through the pressures of culture like what you were saying, and you talked about exposing narratives and exposing pressures, particularly even within the Christian parenting sphere. Those things are still real. That's still very relevant. I mean, things like spanking, things like potty training, things like to time out or not to time out. Like those are still things that even when our girls were little, I'm like, am I doing this right? Is this, sleep training your baby? All of these things that feel like such a huge deal when you're in the middle of it and you're trying to figure it
Mhm.
out. And then now when I'm looking back on it, I'm like, oh, it's okay. You don't have to be so stressed about that. But when you're a young new mom in it, it feels like such a big deal because
Mhm.
now these young moms have, and when I say young mom, I mean moms of young children, they have social media.
Mm.
When I was, when our girls were young, that was before social media had really become such a huge driver and so integrated into every part of life. I mean, I think there
Right.
was Facebook, and then, yeah, I mean, it was just so different back then.
So different.
Right, the voices were not as loud all the time. And
Mhm.
so I just feel like I am really looking forward to hearing from some of these moms of little ones to hear like what is it like to move through potty training a toddler when you have social media telling you, well, do it this way and they'll be potty trained in 2 days, or do it that way. And, so many voices and making you, they kind of trick your brain into thinking, well, if I do it right,
Yes.
then it'll, then we'll get the result that we want. And I even experienced that with the sleep training stuff when Amelia was a baby with this one particular book that a well-meaning friend gave me, and it was
Mm-hmm.
just a nightmare.
Mm-hmm.
Gretchen, what has helped you establish your vision for parenting? Like, were there resources? Were there
Mm-hmm.
special relationships? Was it like this kind of deep conviction that the Lord just put in your heart? How was that written into into your mind or into your convictions? What was that
Mm-hmm.
like, and how did that form?
Well, I remember starting out, I mentioned before, like my training was as a pediatrician. And so I had read a lot of just child development things over the
Mm,
years. And then once had my own children and I'm reading different parenting books and as a believer and, I'm just reading book after book and so many of them I just felt like were awful. And I do want to eventually in our discussion to actually, I don't know if we should do this or not, but I kind of want to call out the books that I think are awful and that you
really?
should probably put through the shredder because I think that for so long as believers, we have tiptoed around these books, but they just need to be exposed for what they are. So hopefully at some point in this series, we will get to that. But I had read these different books and that's really where I initially went to for help was through books. And there were a few blogs that was back in the day when blogs were just
Wow.
starting. So there were
Hmm.
a few blogs of moms that I followed. But I remember I read one book that I just thought was awful. And I remember I was with my children at the park and they were all little and playing. And I remember crying aloud to God and saying, God, I cannot believe there are so many books about raising children that I just feel like are abusive and awful. And do you want me to just spend my life like speaking out against these books? Like, is that my calling? Kind of connecting the pediatric background and the motherhood that I was in. It was like, do I need to speak out against these books? Is that kind of my calling in all of this? And why have I read all of this and why am I so disturbed by all of this?
Mm,
And it was like God clearly said, I don't want you to be against something. I want you to be for something. I
mm,
want you to be for motherhood. I want you to be for the moms. I want you to be for children and for healthy homes. And it really changed my perspective and it kind of settled me into this is my calling. It's
mm,
not that I'm supposed to be a perfect mom. It's I am supposed to connect with other moms and connect with other women and show them it is a beautiful thing to love your children and to
mm,
have a relationship with them and to have a friendship with them. And I can be for motherhood and not have to constantly speak out against all the negative and all of the bad. That I
mm.
can be for something. And that is kind of what started my whole journey of leading mom heart groups and working with Sally Clarkson. We had her on in our Home for the Holiday series. And so back to blogs. So one of the blogs that I read, the mom had on her sidebar books on my nightstand, and one of them was Mission to Motherhood.
Mm.
And so I ordered that book. And like I said, I had read so many books that were just awful. And so I read Mission to Motherhood. And I think I cried through the whole book because it was such an outpouring of putting to words what was in my heart. It was my heart for motherhood that I could not put into words, put into the most beautiful words. And that was written by Sally Clarkson. And so I remember I emailed her and just kept asking her questions. And she was so gracious to reply. And so I ended up connecting with her and now I have worked with her for the past, I think, over 10 years now. So that was kind of my beginning calling, I feel like, into kind of meshing my pediatrics world, my advocacy for children with my heart for moms. And yeah, my mom heart groups and continuing to read so many books has really been my main sources, I feel like, of who I have relied on. I feel like it was my group of mom friends that we formed through our mom heart group that really grounded me and encouraged me. And that's where our friendship was born. And I feel like so many of our close friendships were born through that group. And unfortunately, I feel like our churches, I don't want to be like totally negative and calling out all the things in this series, but I feel like our churches in general, for whatever reason, in this time, are not really creating avenues for supporting moms. I feel like there is a lot of maybe a little bit of insecurity as far as, or women who want to be a mom and can't, or women who are single and want to be married and be a mom. And then there are women who have gone through loss after loss. And so there's so much grief and heartache and uncertainty around motherhood. And then you add in there are moms who work, there are moms who stay home, there and I feel like our churches don't want to step on anyone's toes. And so in general, they say nothing,
Hmm.
which I think kind of goes against God's heart for motherhood, really, and for families. And so, it's just this really tough space. And so there is a lot of void that needs to be filled and discussions that need to be had. But yet, yes, we want to do that in a very thoughtful, considerate way for all women. So yeah, it can be really messy, I feel like too. That was kind of the long-winded answer, I think, of how I have gotten to this point.
I can just tell that this is so like just so deeply ingrained in your spirit and in your calling because I haven't like I know that all of this about you. Like I know that this is how you feel. I mean, I've heard you talk about this for years, but it's been a long time since I've heard you kind of be foundational about it because I mean,
Mm,
we know this about each other and we this is how our friendship began, but to hear you talk about it, it just is reminding me just of what a gift you've been to my, not just to
mm,
me, but to my family, because you've walked alongside me through some really hard things. And there's definitely times when I think, and I know I've told you this before, I don't know that my family would still be together
mm.
if it weren't for your encouragement and friendship and just the perspective that you have, the it's a marathon, not a sprint, and no perfect parents, but we're meant to be together, and
Mm,
the resources, all the things through the years that
mm.
Sally has published and you shared, and like when you go to a conference and you're like, "Whoo, I'm on fire again." That's how I feel
Yes.
listening to you talk about it,
Yes.
and it's
Oh,
the way that you kind of articulated the dynamic with the churches handling the motherhood thing too. I agree.
mm,
I think very much I think the church feels the tension of all of those different kind of subsets of women, connected to women who aren't yet moms who want to be, like all of these different subgroups. So I think they're acknowledging that it's there, but not in a way that's forward facing to the congregation and not in a way that's actually serving and loving the
mm,
community. It's avoidance, right?
mhm,
And I mean, I definitely see that. It's almost like they think that if they do organize something that's specifically for these moms, then it's somehow eliminating or discounting or not including another one of those groups. And that's not it at
mhm,
all. There has to be a place for everybody to kind of find their people to help them feel like they're not alone, to let them know that yes, you can have your ideals, but you're probably going to be living in everyday life most of the time.
mhm,
But to have some connections and commonalities, and I know through small groups and things like that, there are connections that are made, and through serving like volunteer teams together, there's connections that are made. But there's something very unique about each of those groups that you kind of mentioned, but particularly to motherhood, because
mhm,
motherhood whether you are a mother yet or you long to be one, there's something about that that's very unifying. And if, I mean, from the beginning of time, it has been a thing. And I would love to see there be more of an intentional connecting and supporting,
Hmm.
and it not be from a place of fear. But even just coming out and saying, like we did starting this conversation, this doesn't mean we're going to get it right. This doesn't mean that
Right.
we're the ultimate final authority. It means that there's value to this, and we're willing to start somewhere. And
Right.
we'd love to hear from you how to make
Right.
this better.
Hmm.
And let it be more of a partnering as opposed to being from a place of authority and finality.
Hmm. And I
Um,
think that's one of the gifts of inviting in a multi-generational community. Because I think if you say, okay, we're going to have moms of 2-year-olds all get together, that can be helpful, but it can also just be, oh my goodness, we're all in this together. We're all overwhelmed. You need the moms who have gone before you, who can give you encouragement through that season. You need the grandmothers who, have hopefully maybe have some time to step in and help you with your toddlers. And, there's just such a beauty and a gift in that multi-generational community, which I think we had to some extent in our mom heart group. I mean, we had grandmothers, we had pregnant moms, there was quite a range. And I think that really that's what women need is they need that community. And I think that's one of the myths that we will touch on in an upcoming myth episode because, historically we lived near our aunts and our grandmas and our cousins, and as women, we had all these women who were helping us. And now we're in this culture where every family is like their own little island and they're supposed to be able to do it all themselves. And it's just too much pressure. So I shared a little bit of like how I established kind of my vision for kind of the ministry part of it. But do you want to talk, Jennifer, about like establishing your vision for parenting specifically? Like, was that something, a process that you went through, or was it kind of one that evolved over time? Was that something that wasn't ideal for you? Was it an ideal to have a vision for what motherhood and parenting would look like for you?
I would say, I mean, I would still even say now there are specifics within my parenting vision that continue. I would say there's like refinement that's happening.
Hmm.
But when our girls were really little, I knew that I just wanted there to be deep connection.
Hmm.
And I knew that I wanted there to be delight, and I wanted the girls to feel safe around me. And I wanted to enjoy our time together. I wanted to have tea parties. I wanted to do art. I wanted to go to the arboretum and to the gardens and see Christmas lights. And, a lot of what we talked about, like when we talked about art and how
Hmm.
being kind of immersing our families in beauty and what that journey is like and how you can incorporate that into parenting. That was a lot of what I had kind of idealized as far as parenting, and particularly with girls. Like there's some things about when you find out that you're going to be a mom of daughters, there's the femininity elements and the things that I'm just drawn to naturally that I was excited to share with the girls. But as far as discipline, I didn't have a vision for that, but I really just kind of assumed that they would listen and be obedient because I loved them and that it would be simple. And that wasn't the case. And I didn't understand the idea of training my children. I
Hmm.
understand the idea of teaching because I have a teaching degree. I'm an educator. I have a natural teaching spirit. That's something that I enjoy. But when it came to, I think I kind of looked at that more along the lines of like skill development, whether it was potty
Hmm.
training or teaching how to, my view for training wasn't so, it was more like skill based as opposed to behavior and
Hmm.
attitude and shaping. I think attitude is just a big part of that.
Hmm.
And so A well-meaning friend had given me a book, and multiple other moms who I looked up to at the time also suggested this book when Amelia was a baby, but it created a tremendous amount of stress and pressure that I put on myself,
Mhm.
and it ended up being a really unhealthy relationship that I had with the the messages and the kind of the prescriptions of the book and the formulas, I guess, and like the fruit of that in our home, and it just was very chaotic and unhealthy. And then I threw that out the window when Lucy was born and did things very differently and saw the fruit of that too. And then I was filled with regret
Mm,
for like some of the way that things had happened with Amelia. I really felt like, gosh, I just felt deep grief over what I missed out on for not knowing better or for not trusting my
mm,
instincts. That was really the biggest advice that I
mhm,
wish someone had given me. Trust your instincts. The Lord has given you instincts as a mother for a reason. Listen to that, trust that. That doesn't mean they're going to be perfect, but you don't need something that feels like you're ripping your heart out when you're following what the book says. Those should
right.
not that shouldn't be happening. And I didn't have anybody giving me permission to
Mhm,
ignore the book.
mhm.
So a few years later into parenting, when Amelia's about 5, that was when I was introduced to you, Gretchen, and your Mom Heart group. And we started the first book we were doing, Heartfelt Discipline by Clay Clarkson. And it completely revolutionized the way that I saw the parenting journey and biblical discipline. And it really, right out of the gate, exposed some passages in scripture that Christian parenting voices have used and turned and warped in a way that really was not aligned with the teachings
Mhm,
of Jesus. And I finally felt like, oh, this is articulating what I knew in my heart.
mhm.
This is putting words on a page to what I was feeling in my heart. Like what you said when you was it ministry of
Mis-
motherhood or mission of
Mission.
motherhood?
Hmm.
Yeah, when you first read that, you're thinking this is my heart on paper.
Yes.
Heartfelt discipline is so relationship focused.
Hmm.
And so that in starting to incorporate relationship focus and training and just kind of changing the way that I saw interactions and how, not having this kind of perfectionistic approach to parenting and to discipline and realizing it's so much more about navigating the journey well, like through the years, as opposed to, I've already told you this. I should never have to tell you again. That's not how humans work. Not children, not
Right.
teens, not adults. That's not reality. That's ideal, but that's not a healthy ideal. That
Right.
that would be really convenient, but that's not humanity.
Right.
So having to figure out what are my ideals in parenting? Are they ideals? And then what does everyday
Mhm.
life look like? And for my kid, also realizing my children have ideals. They're
Right.
not probably most of the time not going to be everyday life for them. So I feel like as far as my vision for parenting and how does that change? I mean, I feel like what's still at the very foundation even now parenting teens and who's going to be 18 in November,
Mhm.
and we're in April right now. Having that on the horizon is, I feel like that has been one of the most sobering parts of parenting over the past year because up until Amelia turned like all the way through her, being 16, I still kind of felt like what the world says is adulthood, which is what she's really in, like she's really
Mhm.
clinging to that. Well, I'm going to be an adult. Up until the time when she turned 17, up until then, I really kind of felt like, oh, we're not going to have to worry about that now. But now, because it's truly right around the corner for us, just half a year away, the way that we set boundaries, the way that we communicate, the way that we you know, set limits or all of those things, particular most of all just with boundaries, the way that we do that, I feel like we are picking tools up that are much sharper right now because
Mm.
I feel like the impact is so much more significant because she sees her independence as being so much closer, and I don't want to push her towards that for the wrong reason.
Right.
I want her appetite for independence to be because she feels confident and loved and supported, not because she just wants to get out of here as fast as she can.
Right.
I don't want that. All of those things, but still, at the foundation of all of the parenting decisions, I still feel like it's very much relationship, preserving
Hmm.
that relationship and incorporating, building in more friendship, like preparation for when our relationship truly is just friendship. You know, when our authority has waned, I really want to be well prepared transitioning towards that because I know it will come. I
Hmm.
know that will come, and I see the fruits of that with both of my parents, how they were intentional with me with building friendship over time, and I'm thankful for that. I do feel like it took longer than it needed to in some cases with my parents, and that, you know, that's okay. But I do feel like that's something that I have learned from as well. Like, what can I do to prepare friendship sooner in my relationships with my children when they become adults?
Hmm.
I will also say another thing that kind of informs our parenting philosophy right now is safety
Hmm.
with them being older and driving and you know, all of that. Safety is another thing that kind of plays into a lot of our parenting. Like, is
Hmm.
this healthy? Is it safe? With protecting our relationships still being at the foundation of that. And
Hmm.
try not to parent from a place of fear because
Yeah.
they sense it too.
Hmm.
Um, but also, like, we even had a conversation with one of our girls yesterday that, you know, I'm sorry that this boundary feels unrealistic for you. I know it feels unreasonable and maybe embarrassing, but at the same time, like, you'll understand when you're a parent. It's really scary to be a parent and to just not know. I'm just releasing my heart into the world.
Hmm.
And I just say, I'm sorry, maybe this isn't the right decision, but all I can tell you is this decision is not coming from a place of control. It is coming from a place of conviction, and it just is not going to change right now. And being willing to say, I might not have this right, but I do believe that
Right.
this is a conviction, and and we can keep talking about it, but our decision isn't going to change.
Right. Yeah.
So I think that is very common right now, navigating teen
Hmm.
parenting stuff. It's very hard
It
because
is.
I want to keep their trust. I want to build trust, but I also try to just be very honest in those conversations of saying, like, maybe I don't have it right, but I can tell you, I love you. I want you to have fun. I want you to, you know, whatever those things are.
It's so good. And I think, you touched on several things that are also, I think, the keys of the foundation that I had wanted, the relationship, the honesty and the trust. I think those were big for me also. And I think a lot of how I kind of look at parenting in general is kind of figuring out like what is your perception and belief about children? And
Mm,
some people think, the parent is the authority, and not only the authority, but like the parent is like the controller of the child, and the child is the parents. And there's this, that kind of ownership feeling, and that can create very much like a place of fear and a place of control guiding what you're doing. But if you see a child as a unique individual made in God's
mm,
image for a purpose, with a unique personality, with a unique gifting, and then you are more of a discoverer of who this person is that God has given you, less of a controller of who this person that God has given you. And so I think, as so many things that we've talked about, you kind of have to take a step back and say, what do I think about this? That reminds me of like our education series, what does it mean to be educated? I think it's so easy because boom, we get thrown into parent, it's like married and pregnant and you have this baby and there's no like real education process for figuring it all out. And it's like you go home from the hospital and you're like, we really get to take this baby home. Like we're responsible. I mean, it feels very sudden, I think, to a lot of
Mhm.
people. I know it did to us when we left the hospital with our first, of just like, oh my goodness, we have to keep her safe and teach her, no, 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 all the things. But I think so if you pull back and you start with, what do I think about this little person? And, their autonomy and my responsibility. And so you think about this little person, then you also think about what is my role? And when this little person is 10 and 20 and 30 and 40, what do I want them to think about me? What do I want them to remember about me? What do I want my relationship with them to be? I think being able to take a step back and have that kind of reflection is what can help you lay a foundation for what your vision is that won't be swayed by the everyday life and the circumstances and the frustrations. Now, it's not going to mean that you'll be a perfect parent by any means, but I think having that core vision of this child and your role will help you live it when it gets harder. And I think having that kind of clarified vision and then sharing it with, like with you. I mean, when you share it with your friend and you're like, this is my heart for my children and our family, then you have, and with your spouse, and you refine it with your spouse, and you have people in your life who then know your vision and know your heart and can help you navigate the circumstances and the challenges because they will come. I don't know of any parent throughout history that has never had challenges. So yeah, establishing that vision for childhood. And I think there are several books that we can link. We've talked so far, Mission to Motherhood and Heartfelt Discipline. But I also think for your vision of children and of childhood, for the children's sake, I feel like that is such a
Mhm.
foundational book for any person. I mean, even if you don't have children, even if if you're a young teacher working with children, or, you volunteer at church in with the children. It's just such a good book at how we see children and how we treat them. And oh, it's just such a good one. So that was another one that I was thinking of when I was talking about establishing your vision. Ministry and motherhood that you had mentioned too, that is another great one for helping you to establish your vision. And I know it can feel hard at times, especially if you are a parent of younger children, to feel like I don't even have the time to establish my vision for parenting, but I feel like taking time when maybe your children are at nap time or bedtime and having those conversations with your spouse, it's so important and it will bear so much fruit. So to be able to just turn the TV off and say, okay, let's talk about what our goals are as parents or what our hopes are as far as our vision for parenting. I think it can really, like I said, have dividends greatly down the road.
I feel like, to be fully transparent, I think there are more couples than maybe we would realize where the parents are not on the same page, and one of them is okay with that.
Mm.
Where you may have a parent that is fully invested, soaking up all of these resources, reading the books, having the conversations, going to the groups, digging into the word, and is developing this really deep sense of conviction over
Mhm.
what they want their relationships with their children to be like, and having the future in mind, decades down the road, like preparing now for when your children are adults. Will they want to come home at Christmas? When they see your name pop up on their phone, will they go, oh, hold on, I've got to answer it, it's my mom or dad? Or will they go, oh, I don't want to, I'm not answering that.
Mhm.
I like understanding now, and not to say that mistakes now are never going to be redeemed, but understanding that there's there are implications to patterns that
Hmm.
continue. And in full disclosure, my husband and I, Carrie and I, have not always been on the same page about parenting styles, or really even, we'll go through different seasons where one of us is really, really invested in learning and growing and unifying and have those conversations, and then the other one is really not. And because it takes energy, and it takes a lot of times, it's very convicting because when you realize I have to make some adjustments to align with my convictions, but I don't really want to make the adjustments
Hmm.
because I have these own patterns, these own beliefs, these own narratives in my mind and my heart, maybe from how I was raised, or maybe from my own experiences, or maybe I'm taking things personally from my child that I shouldn't, but I'm
Hmm.
just not robust enough. I'm just not sturdy enough emotionally, not yet. Or I still think they're manipulating me when really they're just still being formed. And then we're
Hmm.
taking things personally. And that, even even things like, do we yell in our house or do we not yell? Like, are we just in general, if we, like, do we
Hmm.
apologize? Do we model that? Or do we say, you know what? They know I didn't mean it. Like,
Hmm.
where do we land with things like that, with repair? What does the repair process need to look like? Every couple is going to go through seasons where they're maybe on the same page, and then maybe they're kind of out of sync with that. So I do feel like that would be a good conversation for us to have in a little bit more depth at some point, about when mom and dad don't agree, when
Hmm.
you and your spouse do not share the same vision for parenting, or when one wants to do a lot of investing and a lot of, Gretchen, you were saying, like, at night after the kids go to bed, sit down with your spouse and talk about it. That was really hard for us.
Hmm.
Carrie's exhausted. He's worked all day. He's traveling. That's just not,
Hmm.
he trusts me. He's always trusted, for the most part, me and kind of what I felt like the Lord was putting on my heart, and he would listen when I would talk about it. But that doesn't mean that he would always kind of graft himself and his parenting style and his philosophy. It's really not just like what he does outwardly. It's like what's in your heart. Like, what do you really
Hmm.
believe about parenting and those relationships with your children, and who they are, even as like a little person? Do we see them as little people the same way? There have been many, many years for us where we were not aligned,
Hmm.
and it it takes work on both of our parts for that. For, like, what does it look like as a wife? Does trust play into that? Like, I feel like we have gotten to know each other so much better. I mean, we've been married. We'll have our 20th anniversary in November. Which is wild, but it's
Hmm.
taken so much work and time and prayer and investment, and I dare say long suffering,
Yes.
to bear with one another and stay committed to the unit of our family, to the unity of our family. But it is
Hmm.
it is so hard when you see your spouse parenting in a way that you don't agree with. It's
Right.
so hard. What is my role? And do I step in? Should I step in? How do I know what that line is? Like, it can be very hard,
Hmm.
and I would say that parenting has been the single most difficult part of our marriage.
Hmm.
It has worn us in ways that nobody in premarital counseling, nobody talks about that at your bridal shower. Nobody writes that in your cards that you get when you get back from your honeymoon and you're opening your wedding presents. Nobody writes you about that and says, by the way, everybody just kind of knows, well, that's just, I don't know if it's like this thing, like, well, that's their journey and they're going to have to work through it just like every other family. I
Right.
personally would have appreciated a heads up.
Right.
Same
A
with
little
menopause.
honest
Just
conversation.
right. Can somebody just let me know? Can I just have a sign, like, before I get to the curb? Just tell me that it's coming. But I think that has been the single hardest part
Hmm.
of our marriage, is misalignment in parenting philosophy and parenting style. And again, a lot of that goes to our personalities are different. How we were raised is very different. And just who we are.
Yes.
I chose to stay home. We chose for me to stay home. We both were very much unified on that, from dating. We just really felt like that was the right thing for us. I chose to homeschool. I'm with the kids, still am most of the time. But it still was important to me that we were on the same page. And it kind of felt like I had to do a lot of work to convince him to prioritize that at times. And I think he would be really honest about that too. I don't
Hmm.
feel like I'm oversharing at all
Hmm.
because our story, our experiences, I do believe are meant to be an encouragement to others who are maybe going through the same thing.
Hmm.
So if you are in a situation, if you're listening and you're in a situation where you and your spouse are not on the same page and it's causing division in your marriage, I would just say, first of all, get on your knees and pray to the Lord that
Hmm.
He would bring peace and healing and unity. Pray for your spouse and find ways, get creative with ways to build them up and encourage them and to grow their trust in you.
Mm.
You don't ever want you and your spouse to see each other as opponents because that can be so destructive to the relationship with your children and in your marriage, and your children will see that. But I would say pray for
Hmm.
unity and just build one another up.
It's so good. Two kind of foundational things I think you really touched on were kind of the sanctification through parenting. And I think just as
Mm.
marriage is sanctifying, parenting is sanctifying. And so I
Yes.
think to expect yourself, like I said, when you come home from the hospital with your first child, and to expect yourself to like be this perfectly patient, wonderful parent. Like, no, it is a sanctification process. And parenting and marriage and friendships and family, like, those are all ways that if you keep saying to the Lord, not my will, but yours, if you, He will sanctify you through that. And so, kind of releasing yourself to be open to that, that allows you to have humility with your children and to freely apologize to them and to share with them because you are on this journey with them. So I think sanctification, that was a foundational thing that you shared. And I think the other key thing is that there is no formula. And I think what you
Mm.
shared about, each child and each, you and Carrie both have a history of how you were raised, and then you come together, you have these different personality children, and all, there could not be a formula to raise your children and to raise my children. I mean, it's completely different backgrounds, and I mean, all the things are different. So, for anyone to think that there is a formula I can follow, or 5 steps to perfectly obedient children, or 5 steps to never sin again as a mother, like, it's just not going to happen. And so, getting rid of that idea that there is a formula, and getting rid of the idea that I should be this perfectly sanctified person going into parenting. No, it is a process. And the way I like to think about it is it is not formula-based parenting because there is no formula, but it's spirit-led parenting. As believers raising children, it is a connection with the Holy Spirit of trusting that conviction, trusting, like you said, those instincts that God has given you, right? Of learning to trust those instincts, learning to trust that voice and to walk in that. And then when you make a mistake, to humbly apologize and go through that sanctification process.
Gretchen, we've covered a lot of ground. I feel like we've already gotten pretty deep with some of the things that we've shared and just identified and discussed in this conversation. And this is just our introduction. So I'm looking forward to our next conversation. Before I tell you what that's going to be, though, I'm going to give you a few action steps. The first one is going to be to just commit to praying for your children and for your spouse when it comes to parenting and the relationships that you have within your home, within your family. Just commit to prayer. Ask the Lord to show you how to pray for them and for Him to give you a heart that is just committed to seeking Him on their behalf. Another step I would encourage you to take is to consider what resources out there, what voices, what resources, social media, whatever it is, what has informed your parenting vision and your parenting philosophy and decisions so far. Where do you turn when you have a question? Is it a certain account on social media? Are you still looking at blogs like we used to? Is it a special relationship with someone you trust? So consider what has been informing you in your parenting journey. And then I would also say the last thing would be to identify the vision that you're operating from right now. Up until this point, we're not asking you to change anything yet or to set goals yet, but to just do a little bit of internal work to figure out what's really driving your parenting decisions. And if someone were to look from the outside in, what would they say is your vision? Kind of where are you right now? So, one, two, and three. Number one, prayer. Number two, what are the resources that you've relied on up until this point? And number three, what is the vision that you've been operating from for your family up until this point? Okay, so for our next episode, our next big conversation, we're going to talk about myths regarding parenting and also some misconceptions and then mistakes. And I have a really long list of the mistakes
Me too.
part. So I'll just be really honest about that. I can tell you what not to do for sure.
Right. Me too. Oh, goodness.
Well, thank you very much. We are just so grateful that you would find a moment to listen. And please let us hear from you. Let us hear what you're interested in, what you're curious about, what you want to hear more on, and we will find a moment with you next time.